Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, time to put myself in a good light. Yeah, so I was asked to um, give a talk, and suggested that maybe I could give like a personal account, as John did yesterday. So I've been thinking how I can wrap it into something to have some morale, which is important. But let's see how this goes. So yeah, I'm 28 years old at the moment. And so I was born 28 years ago. And I think I had a pretty normal childhood, pretty normal family. Like no major traumas, no major incidents, but like it's, I guess, like most families are a bit dysfunctional under the surface. Like surface-wise, pretty like perfectly fine, but emotionally a bit like we don't talk about emotions and stuff like this, which of course affects anyone when they grow up. But yeah, it was pretty normal. I remember like already back when I was a child, I had these moments of clarity. So I could like, I remember especially in the, um, like there is this floating harbor at my grandparents' place. And I used to spend like a lot of time there during the summers. And then basically laying there and looking in between the um, boards. And like could literally lay there for hours and just watch what was going on. And there was this incredible peace, which I've recognized in retrospect as like it's the same softness, perfectly lovely softness, which makes such things possible to lay and just watch for hours and hours. Um, yeah, but I remember also like back in preliminary school that I used to have these good periods and bad periods. And I think it's also quite normal that people go through different cycles, or it wouldn't be a problem. Uh, but I remember like get some periods it was really easy to get up in the morning, and I would really enjoy getting up like really early and have plenty of time. Um, and then other times it would be impossible to get out of bed uh, because I felt completely poisoned, like just literally having to be dragged out of bed. And this got steadily worse in the teenage years. And I also uh, like started, I think I drank alcohol, got really drunk first time at like 11 years old. And by 13, that had become like a way to deal with stuff. So in these periods, like not fully blown pattern at 13, but it kind of developed this. So that was the way I dealt with these periods of yeah, like mild kind of depression, um, and also like the the euphoria of getting out of a depression would also be dealt with in the same way, because um, it's also something that has to be processed. It's not euphoria is not actually very comfortable if you. It's not very easy to sit still when you are being euphoric. So yeah, teenage years was building this pattern, like these destructive patterns of dealing with uh, the different cycles, the two polarities of being depressed or being very euphoric, very, I guess the word like manic, very wanting to do a lot of stuff and realize, having a lot of ideas and wanting to realize these ideas. But eventually, yeah, I also started using other substances like weed to also, well, in the beginning it wasn't that, but it also fell into the same pattern, filled the same kind of function, in a similar function at least. But the thing that, like, it became so obvious because of this, like the pattern was there, and the ways I had to deal with it, or the ways that I figured out how to deal with it, made these patterns very obvious. Like there was no missing that there is something wrong here. And also, yeah, weed has this kind of effect that it concentrates everything and enhances the things that you deal with anyways. So that also made things quite apparent. And it was around this time that I also got involved with Dharma, like starting to have this interest, a really strong interest towards meditation. And in the beginning it was also a lot of like physical yoga and breathing exercises and stuff like this, but also like the principles behind, so the philosophy. And I also started studying philosophy because I thought there was something there, like something that well, I had figured out that, or at least I thought I had figured out, that society doesn't have all the answers. Like people, the grown-ups don't have the answers, so I kind of have to figure it out. So starting to move in that direction of figuring out things on my own. But these, but the patterns didn't leave, and Dharma filled the role, like filled the space, which were the like the good periods. That's when I practiced Dharma, and then it would completely shatter like all routine when like I used to also call it like when the rebel came and just shattered all the rebel being a mind being or a pattern, and shattered all the routines and yeah, that like and entering then like a period of depression again, which because I didn't have at that time the resources to carry on a practice while being in the low period. But yeah, we can fast forward probably. Yeah, no, I also used to get actually these like also retrospectively, I can say that it's visitations from different Buddhas, from different enlightened beings, which would often make me very euphoric again. So it's kind of made that, yeah. It helped in the way that I would receive some kind of information that of a direction. For example, I had studied, after I studied philosophy, I was looking for something else to do, and after a visit, I knew that I had to, like I was just given the information that it's pretty obvious that what you are going to do, you are going to help people, but I didn't get any more information, so I had to figure it out on my own, which moved me into physiotherapy, but it's not relevant, but it gave some sort of like short-term direction at least, which was very beneficial at the time, because without it, I don't know, really, there wouldn't have been much direction at all. But then also, like when I encountered open heart, and it was through finding the awakening first, like the awakening, the two-part formula, that was the first introduction, and I did the guidance, and to my surprise, and I guess to everyone's surprise who do the guidance, you don't get rid of all the problems, or even if you're told beforehand, it can be a bit of a surprise that not everything is released at once. But what I actually noticed was that these periods, which had used to last for a long time, but milder in nature, actually sped up and became more intense in nature. So if there were months before, it would be maybe a week or weeks. So it kind of sped up. But then, like, the big difference was that there was a direction, like and there was a solution to it, like that I could feel in my own body, not that I had to read in a book anymore. That there was a solution. Like, I knew for myself that there was a solution because of the actually experiencing the clarity and the freedom that is spoken of. So this was quite a quite a difference, and made the whole thing much more bearable. Because if you, which I think I did several times, fully realize that it's completely cyclic. Like, I was just walking in circles basically, and these circles were also, as I realized, created by myself. And this was before awakening. Like, I could see this, not all the time, of course, but were these incidents where this was so apparent that I just couldn't get away from it, so to speak. And if there is no Dharma, but you kind of know that this discontentment is not going away, then I guess that would how do you say, that would well, it could be called like a hell if you don't have the solution, but you're in the shits. So that's a good, that's a candidate for a hell. But after, it's not, because it still sucks, but there is this direction to it, and you know it's passing, and with experience of dealing with it, it's also like quite obvious that it's passing. It's not really a problem. So suffering becomes a different. It's seen in a completely different light, and I kind of it's when people say that, it's the most annoying thing when people say that suffering is like the greatest, like a gift, a blessing in disguise. But it kind of is as well, though. And I would go so far to say that, like, or far to say, like, without suffering, there is no reason to practice, so to speak. There is no how do you say, momentum. Like, why would you want to, if everything was like okay? Because I'm not like, if you're a Buddha, then you don't have to practice. But if everything is okay, and you just don't feel like practicing, well, you're kind of just pushing the stuff in front of you and have to deal with it at some later point. So this yeah, this kind of bipolarity of going between different states of suffering. You have the depression, and then you have the euphoria. You have the depression, and you have the euphoria. Was really kind of a gift because it made things quite apparent, and it's also a really good motivation for practice. Because I've been thinking about this, about getting comfortable, and if one gets comfortable, it's kind of that's it. There has to be some friction for practice to yeah, for having, or for motivation to take refuge in practice. So yeah, I guess suffering is one aspect that is it's like that is important in a sense, in the way that those who have it the worst and have efficient dharma are in my mind, the luckiest, because they will have to move quite quickly through the stuff. There is no other way, so you kind of just go along. And another factor that I think has been important, and also which is related also, because it wasn't just me suffering because of the patterns, but other people around me were also suffering because of these same patterns. And like when one is stuck in, for example, if there is suffering and one is trying to cover it up with something else, say for example alcohol, then this will directly affect people around. Like even if they don't know you're drinking or whatever, you're going to treat them in a different way than if your mind was clear. It's quite obvious when I put it like that. But so there is this motivation of or suffering in that way really puts this whole bodhicitta makes it concrete. Like, because if there is no practice and there are all these kind of destructive patterns, and or if you choose to not practice, to put it like that, even if you have found Dharma, then it's going to affect other people. So this motivation of, like, it sounds very lofty often when people speak of bodhicitta, at least well, I used to think so, and sometimes I still think so. But it's much, much more concrete than trying to save all living beings. Like getting rid of patterns, it directly affects, as like ripples in water, and not like on an abstract plane or anything like this, but really directly, concretely. So yeah, suffering also brought forward this thing. And if you have that, like you have motivation to practice for yourself because there is no other way. You have motivation to practice for other people because you're an asshole if you don't. Like not like you have no choice than to be an asshole because that's the patterns. Then these two together make quite like a motivation get this stuff done. Yeah, and one thing that is important in this, like, or one thing that can be dragged out of it is this willingness to change, which is essential. Because if there is no willingness to change the patterns, then I don't think they're not going to just change on their own. So it has to come from somewhere, and it has to come from oneself. Like it's common to say, like in treatment of drug addicts, that you cannot just go in and help somebody. They have to actually have the willingness to change on their own. So yeah, I think that's quite important. So yeah, when the worst storm is blowing, it's important to try to kind of feel these things, recognize them, and recognize that there is not somebody else that can do anything about it. Like even the Buddhas can't do anything about it if there is not this willingness, if there is not this, if you don't ask for help, you don't get the help. But yeah, try to recognize, trying to recognize how oneself is involved in the suffering. And when I mean suffering, I also mean like not just the dark night depression kind of thing, but also this uncontrollable euphoric states. So yeah, trying to notice patterns, trying to see that it's cyclic, and that the key is the key is that oneself has to do something about it, or ask for help to deal with it. Yeah, I think that was what I was going to say.
Can you talk more about like how you actually started sitting, meditating, or doing some yoga? All these phases up towards open heart, and how did it change, and all that stuff.
Yeah, as I mentioned, like in the beginning, it was well, like the first major experience that I had that kind of how do you say, rattled things up to the point that I couldn't ignore it was like psilocybin mushrooms, like a quite large dose of that, which in that I ended up like, it was everything compacted, no, how do you say it, like compressed into one experience. So there was the immense euphoria, and there was also being stuck in a loop, like literally there was no time, and being stuck in this alone with my own mind, and trying to figure out things conceptually, and then coming back to the beginning, and then, oh shit, I can't be here, and then trying to figure like out something else, but always coming back to this moment where I didn't want to be. So that was a kind of kind of a shift, because even though I didn't actually remember much of it afterwards, it kind of rattled things up quite a lot. So this was like just, I think when I was 20 or something like this. And a few months after that, I started reading Eckhart Tolle, so I got this notion of awakening, and it spoke to me immediately, because I knew that just because somebody mentioned it, I knew that there is something called awakening, and that it's important, and like it felt like the whole purpose back then. And from that went to Hatha Yoga, or was introduced to Hatha Yoga, physical exercises and breathing techniques. Also some basic meditations. So it was, and there was also like, it was in the Hindu context. So that's what I was most attracted to in the beginning, like the Hindu deities, Shiva, and yeah. Anyways, the Hindu perspective. So although I didn't actually understand much of it, because it kind of from back then, it was just a lot of information. I didn't really understand much of the philosophy or stuff like this, but I noticed immediately the effect on the body from these physical exercises, and especially breathing techniques and the simple meditations. So that was my first practice routine, consisted of physical exercises and breathing techniques. This was like in the good periods where there was a possibility for some kind of morning routine. Where did I go from there? Yeah, like relaxation and becoming familiar with the body, like going through different points in the body. And I felt that was probably what I drew the most out of, like getting back into the body at some level, because I wasn't able to feel the body before that, and I wasn't able to sit still at all. But yeah, I started to have more interest in the meditation part, though, after a while. And I also, well, I was initiated into Kriya Yoga, but I never actually practiced it much. I did a lot of reading. But eventually I was also, I got interested in Buddhism, because it was very simple, like very simple practices. And back then it was mostly like shamatha practices that I was introduced to, but the simplicity of it was quite nice. You just focus on the breath, basically. So I was doing that along with some other stuff. I never had like a teacher during this. It was like, or at least not that I could have a personal contact with. So I was kind of looking for it, or it was in the back of my mind at least. But doing practices on my own, and it was still so that I couldn't really keep the practice up as a continuum. It was still like I was sometimes pulled out of it. But I think it was in maybe 3 years ago that I went to this this Goenka retreat, a 10-day retreat with focusing on Vipassana, and that was the first real taste that, oh, this, like, despite these momentary flashes, that was the first like, wow, there is something here, because my body just started feeling very alive and stuff like this that I hadn't experienced more than just very, very, very briefly, and often also in connection with drugs, which kind of my mind just kind of devaluated. Is that like
devalued?
Yeah, devalued them and put them as like a side effect, because I didn't really experience it otherwise. So I kind of made this barrier between what I experienced when not under the influence of anything and when. But then this Goenka retreat changed that, so I felt that there is actually some potential in meditation that is beyond beyond temporary stuff. Like, even though I knew it on one level, it became more concrete, and I had a practice. So that, and also that marked like that I started being able to sit on a daily basis and not drop out of any like really strict daily basis sitting. But now I remember I should go back actually just a few months, because there was this event that also made Dharma very concrete for me, and the need for Dharma very concrete. And that was that, like, I had been depressed for quite some months, and it didn't leave for some reason, as it had done before, and it just got worse and worse, and to the point where like I'm kind of pulling my hair at night, and like, how do people deal with this stuff? And so I had this intuitive, to put it like that, feeling that you just have to leave, leave the town. So I went like on a 3-month hitchhiking trip that ended on a farm in Germany, where I spent three weeks. And during this hitchhiking trip, all kinds of stuff came up to the surface. And like, there was this breakdown just before I came to this farm. And so I like, at this farm, also the environment there was really bad, due to, like, I was isolated with one person and we didn't like each other very much. So I just, without having like a concrete technique, I just sat down and I just started watching the thoughts going by. And it did something, because it, like, after having done that, like using all the free time that I didn't use to work, so I think it was approximately 3 hours a day, but chopped up in really like smaller chunks, sitting like that, had this effect that I could momentarily see things very clearly, and I knew that it's like, meditation is the way to go. Like, that's what you are going to do. It's not physiotherapy. It's not a physical body in that sense. You have to pursue meditation. But still, it was, even with this insight, like, I became much more serious about it, but I couldn't uphold like or have a continuous practice. But this changed with the Goenka retreat. But I felt that this Vipassana approach was way too narrow, because one of the philosophers that I enjoyed a lot spoke of different levels, like different bodies, and that you had to address all of them. So you have to address the physical body, you have to address you have to have some breathing exercises to address the pranic body, you have to address the mental emotional body, and like awareness. And there are different practices for these levels. And this I didn't feel like I was getting from Goenka or his method at all. So yeah, so I continued searching. I was briefly contemplating becoming a renunciate in a Hindu tradition again, because they did actually address the different bodies. But then luckily I discovered awakening formula, two-part formula for awakening and guidance to awakening. Maybe 6 months, 7 months after the Goenka retreat, and before I got stuck in this very, very theoretical Hindu approach, or yogic Hindu approach. And how it changed after that. How did it not change? It's going from having ideas, or that's like having ideas, and also some very, very scattered glimpses, to actually having a direction, personal experience on a daily basis. Not that everything is just like wonderful on a daily basis, but personal experience and feeling that the meditation practice is actually working the way that it said that it should, that it's supposed to work. And this was something that always frustrated me before, that all these claims, but nothing even close to that is actually taking place within, or that was my experience. Like within my experience, there was nothing like it should be, according to those who taught it. So that was like a major difference, that I gained confidence in my own experience. Awakening, of course, is a major thing there. Pre and post awakening, even though the actual, like, even though it's subtle, it's also kind of radical in the sense that you get to see quite clearly what Dharma is about. And of course, there is still much work to do, but the context just changed completely. And that was what I said also with these periods also, or the context of suffering, the context of all kinds of objects changed completely, because there was a direction to it. Like I knew how to deal with it, just had to do it. Whereas before I didn't know how to deal with it, even if I had wanted to deal with it. But this also kind of had an effect for a while, that, oh, now the practice is working, so now I don't have to deal with the relative that much. That was like in the beginning months. I had a lot of these thoughts, that it's kind of how do you say, like a classical transcendentalist trap, that you don't need to deal with any of the patterns, because it's just, or the relative person, don't have to improve as a relative person, because there's always Buddhahood there in the future. But that has like become quite apparent, that it just doesn't work that way. You have to continue, like it's this willingness to change. You have to change now, and not in some imaginary future. And the way to do that is to focus on both the relative and in the context of the absolute, or the awareness itself.
got a question. I was just wondering how the patterns that you mentioned before in terms of cycles, do you still experience them in that way, or how has that changed now in your practice?
Well, it's much lighter. That's one thing. Like it doesn't completely drown. Like how can you say? It's like being a boat without a motor, or like I don't know, like a half-sunk boat without a motor before, and then actually being able to kind of float a little bit off the surface, so that the direction is not completely lost, and there is also some possibility of doing things. So yeah, like and so you have that aspect, that it's considerably lighter, like the if you have like these waves, and then they kind of stabilize, or a pendulum that keeps swinging, and it kind of goes closer and closer. I mean, still there might be, it's not, it cannot, it's organic, so sometimes it kind of swings a little bit, and then you understand what I mean.
Sure.
But in addition to that, there is this direction which makes all the difference, or the ability, or the tools to handle it, the tools to deal with it, and the context of suffering being something that can be dealt with and can be food for the practice, instead of something that has to be avoided at all cost. So in those two senses, it has changed quite a lot. It's still not easy to deal with, but it's considerably, like a lot easier to deal with. Yeah, the method to deal with it has also changed. Yeah, any other questions? Did I answer your question? Yeah, I can't really, nothing is coming up that needs to be addressed.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let's sit for a few minutes.